First of all, I want to welcome you to Democrats of Greater Tucson. It is absolutely fabulous to see everybody here today. And we have our guest speaker, Miranda Schubert. Miranda, how are you?
I'm good. Thanks for having me.
So we're going to have a few announcements before we get started. First of all, I'd just like to send my best wishes and hopes for a speedy recovery to Steve Early, who is a member of our board and a really helpful guy. And he's in the hospital today with Christina Early, who's also on the board. He's going to have some kind of a procedure on his heart, and I just want to send him all the best and hope everything goes really well for him. With that, Kathy, tell us about membership, how people can join, and why they should join.
Hello, everyone. You're here at our meeting and you're good Democrats. I'm just practically speechless, not actually, just practically, because I assume that if you're sitting here, you are a member. But it is possible that you may not have paid your dues yet. And if one of you sitting in there watching this Zoom meeting, I would definitely recommend you go to the DGT.org to go to our website and click on Join Now, and you can sign up and be a paid member, which makes you definitely part of our wonderful organization. Okay, right back to you, sir.
Thank you, Kathy.
You bet.
We have Sandy Binion, who ordinarily tells us about the upcoming meetings, also recovering. She had throat surgery about a week ago, and we want to wish her all the best and also a speedy recovery. And filling us in today, Susie Anderson, can you tell us about what are some of the meetings that members can have to look forward to?
Thanks, Larry. Well, we have a stellar schedule starting next week with Catalina Hall, who is chair of the LD11 Dems. And they're sending out recall petition on Mark Fincham, which would delight so many of us if they could get that done. She's been a Dem since Nixon resigned and moved to Arizona in 1999. So she's almost a native. On the 12th of April, we have Margot Cowan, who is the public defender and is heading the petition drive for Pima County Justice for All to put on the 2022 ballot. So that ought to be a really good program. On the 19th of April, Marcos Ismael, who is program manager of the Pima County Housing Center. He's worked for the county for 29 years and has all kinds of helpful information about housing, especially for low income. And then on the 26th of April, we have Steve Kozaczyk, Ward 6 council member who Miranda is running against. So that should be also an interesting meeting to attend. And then we have our own Tim Steller coming on the 3rd of May, who has been a journalist in Tucson for 25 years. Should be a fascinating interview. So I'm looking forward to that. And that's all I have. And hopefully Sandy will be back next week to continue on into May. Thank you all.
Thank you, Susie. We have a couple of announcements. I see, Lucy, you have your hand raised, but first let's turn to Shirley Muni, who is going to tell us about the Tucson Great Decisions Association.
As you know, Great Decisions is an organization that runs discussion programs about foreign policy. And we have one coming up on Monday, April 19th at 2 o'clock, so you won't miss DGT. The speaker is Paulette Kurzer, and the topic is right-wing populism in Western Europe. And as you know, populism isn't just in this country, it's spreading all over the world, including especially Western Europe. And most countries have a very strong right-wing element in their politics. Wondering whether the pandemic will kill that off or increase it. That should be an interesting program. It does cost $10. We have to meet our costs, and we pay an honorarium to our speakers. You can register at TGDA, stands for Tucson Great Decisions Association, tgda.org. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Shirley. Lucy Messing, you've got your hand up.
Thank you, Larry. Two announcements. One from Tanque Verde Dems, April 10th, which is Saturday, our normal drop-in. We are hosting Pima County Attorney Laura Conover and Sheriff Nanos. So, you know, anyone's welcome to attend. We're still Zooming. So if you're interested, I am going to put my email address into the chat so that you can send me the request for Tanque Verde Dems, and I'll send you the link. And my second announcement has to do with the Education Caucus that we have revived. And we are meeting this Thursday, April Fool's Day, at 4:30 by Zoom. Again, if you're interested, you can send me the request. Some of you are already on the list and you should have received some information, but I'm sending out the link tomorrow. So that's it. Thank you.
All right. Thank you. Let's turn now to our speaker. We are delighted to have Miranda Schubert at today's meeting. She is one of 3 candidates running for Tucson City Council in Ward 6, a seat currently filled by Steve Kozacek. Miranda is an academic advisor at the University of Arizona, where she is chair of the department's Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion Working Group. She is also deeply involved with the United Campus Workers of Arizona, Local 7065. For nearly 5 years, Miranda has elevated Tucson's artists and activists and leaders as a DJ for radio station KXCI. And she is the creator and host for Ladytown, which is a live feminist talk show. Since 2016, Miranda has skated with the Tucson Roller Derby with the stage name Pariah Carey. She's served on the board of directors for the last 4 years and has spent a lot of time coaching the Tucson Derby Brats, a youth roller derby league. And with that, Miranda, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Larry. Thanks for that introduction, and thanks for giving time to allow me to come connect with you all and share a little bit more about me. Before we get started, I thought I would take the opportunity to bring up a very timely issue to you all. So I'm in the Legislative and Political Action Committee of the Union, and part of our work involves signal boosting calls to action in order to promote civic engagement, which is something I'm really passionate about, and to fight problematic legislation. So we were talking about this a little bit before the meeting. Arizona Republicans have introduced 19 bills that make it harder to vote. I'm going to put up some information on the screen in case any of you all want to take a picture and call or text Senator Sinema after the meeting to let her know that we want to support HR 1, the For the People Act, in order to protect voter rights. This message just came through this morning, and so I figured I'd share it with you all as a captive audience of good Democrats. So yeah, I'm gonna go ahead and give Senator Sinema a call after this. Voting rights are super important, right? So my name is Miranda. I'm currently in Legislative District 3, Ward 6, Precinct 45 in the Armory Park neighborhood. I also acknowledge my presence on Ta'ana Autumn ancestral lands and commit to going beyond this token gesture to use awareness of place in order to promote justice, accessibility, and environmental stewardship. So just wanting to ground this presentation in the place we are at. Additionally, before I start, I want to acknowledge that today is Cesar Chavez Day, according to the city of Tucson. He was a labor leader, community organizer, and civil rights activist who continues to inspire today. Okay, so who am I? Like I said, my name's Miranda. Here's a picture of me and my girlfriend, Amanda. I'm the eldest daughter of 3, and my parents met when they were both working at TGI Fridays in their early 20s. My mom was waiting tables and my dad was a line cook. So I just come from these working class roots. I come from a childhood where we moved around a lot because of my dad's job. And I grew up seeing how hard he works. And it infused me with this deep awareness that the folks who work the hardest, need to be taken care of. They're the ones who make our society go. I've been in Tucson for about a decade, and that's actually the longest that I've lived in a single place. So I feel very fortunate to be here. And it's the first place that I chose to move to, as a grown-up. Amanda and I rent a small place in Armory Park. I've actually only rented in Tucson, and so I bring that awareness to this role as well. We have 2 cats. Like Larry said, I'm in the United Campus Workers of Arizona and also in Tucson Roller Derby. We're on hiatus right now because of the pandemic. So I thought, why not get involved in local politics? I'm running to be the leader that I wanted to see. So, last summer was a really interesting time. We were all home more and able to tune in more to what was happening. And through the pandemic and through the protests over racial justice, I really became tuned into what local government was all about and who the decision makers were. And there were a lot of talks last summer that a lot of folks who hadn't been engaged in local politics were suddenly interested in, and it was about the budget, and specifically about allocating the budget to more closely align with what the community wants to see, which is essentially boils down to taking better care of people. And so through all of that, I just kept having this growing awareness of wanting to see leadership that I thought that, maybe I could step up and embody myself. It really comes down to listening to constituents and being responsive to concerns. We have a lot of folks in our local communities who care so deeply about the direction that things are going, and they bring a whole host of talents and experiences and perspectives. And there have just been so many moments over the last year that have been heartbreaking to just see the dismissiveness, the defensiveness, the resistance to changing or trying something new. In the face of seeing a lot of people in our communities and in our neighborhoods who are hurting, who need to be taken care of. So, I'm just the kind of person who's action oriented. I don't want to despair. I want to see what I can do. And so I thought, well, it starts with the communities around us. So my platform essentially comes down to 4 main areas. The first one is community-centered development. And part of this motivation, and I think the fact that I've been an academic advisor in higher education for the last 15 years, and I'm just really well practiced at meeting people where they're at, breaking down complex ideas, finding ways to build agreement. I wanted to move past pro versus anti-development talk and figure out ways to partner and work toward the kind of community we want to see. I want small local businesses in Tucson to have a future. We keep seeing these small local legacy businesses closing because of rising rents, and it's really sad. And I believe that if we all worked together, we could figure out a way to stop that from happening. I want new members of our business community to see it as a privilege to build in our communities, right? It feels a lot of times in conversations I've heard with neighborhoods that they feel that these decisions sort of come down and then they're left to deal with figuring out how to react to it, how to communicate with decision makers about why certain things may not be in alignment with what the community wants, Oh, there's another, high-rise luxury apartment building. Oh, great, more office space. Okay, well, every time I walk the dog at the park in the mornings, I see more folks without a roof over their heads. So kind of seems like there's a disconnect in what's going on. I think too often when, people who are in these organizing groups, grassroots, mutual aid organizations, when they speak up to decision makers with constructive criticism, they're often treated like they're nuisances or pests. And I think that's unfortunate. I think that what I see is that a lot of people really care about what's happening. So I'm also really passionate about climate action. We have so much information about what we need to do, and it just feels like we need to follow through and do it, right? We know extreme heat is coming. We know that that situation is going to impact those of us who are most vulnerable. Frontline workers, folks without a roof over their heads, low-income folks. I read a really concerning article that talked about the lack of insulation in mobile homes, for example, and how they just turn into these ovens. And it has to do with federal funding being concentrated on colder climates instead of places with warmer climates, but it's every bit as hazardous. So it's about protecting people. It's also about mitigating climate impact through things like rainwater harvesting, solar, gray water. These are things that, as a renter in Tucson, I've felt are out of reach because you have to stay in one place. And if you're a renter, sometimes your landlord decides that they're going to hike the rent or they're going to move back in, and then you just have to pick up and leave. And so it's really hard to invest in the place where you're living. And so I really want to make these systems more accessible to people. And I think another aspect that needs to be looked at more is, our smaller landlords who, not those big property management companies, but smaller landlords who have properties that they care about and they want good tenants and they want to be, they want to charge a fair rent. They want to be sensitive to the environment. How can we make it easier for those types of landlords to invest in the properties that they're renting out for these climate impact mitigation sort of systems? And then there's transit, which is a whole other area that, is deeply tied to climate change. For years and years, we've seen research, reports, asks from the community for greater investment in non-automobile-centric ways of transportation. So better systems for bicycles and pedestrians, better public transportation. These things all definitely play a big role in how we address the climate change emergency. Housing justice is another area of my platform. I've mentioned I'm a renter, and so I really see things from that perspective. And I think there are definitely cases where I hear folks having conversations about neighborhoods and residents and community members, and I feel left out of that conversation as somebody who rents. I don't hear that perspective being shared enough. And I think it's important because a lot of people in Tucson do rent. But housing justice isn't just about keeping housing more affordable and stopping these skyrocketing rents. I'm sure you all read the article about $4,000 a month rent. Like, that's not acceptable. We need to stop allowing this kind of thing to happen. And housing justice is also tied to things like public safety and climate change. So keeping people in their homes, making it easier for the average Tucsonan to have decent housing in a good neighborhood that's walkable, has good schools, high standard of living. That helps everything. So that's kind of taking a more holistic view of what we need to do to address the challenges that we face. Housing instability is, it's essentially a public health issue, and so it does, I believe, fall upon local government to protect people's public health. And that there are a lot of innovative ways that we could increase the housing load. Again, we have reports and studies and urban stress maps, and we know what we need to do. It's a question of following through and also tracking and monitoring and allowing room to make changes if needed. Like, I feel as though we're past the point where making a plan that is good for the next over 5 years that can't change is maybe not the best way to go, and that we need to be more nimble.
Question in the chat. Bets Putnam Hidalgo would like to know about foreclosures that are affecting Ward 6 and what can be done about foreclosures. She says, I know we are working on evictions, but what can be done about foreclosures?
Good to see you, Bets, and thanks for the question. Truthfully, I would need more information about how City Council plays a role in foreclosures. I will say that I view things through the lens of like equity. And so any practice that that impacts working families in a negative way and that further widens the disparity between the haves and the have-nots is something that I won't support. And so I'm always on the side of fighting for the folks who need more people in their corner. So if we're talking about working families not being able to make ends meet and being put out of their homes, then that's something that I would definitely fight against in whatever capacity I could in my role on city council.
Got a question from Jana Siegel. And she asks, is there anything that can be done so that the taxes don't get raised in longtime residents when the neighborhoods improve?
That's a good question. You know, I do think that what this illustrates is that there are so many different ways that we need to be addressing these challenges. And as we grow as a city and try to raise people up into better ways of living, better jobs, we need to make sure that we're not leaving people behind or disproportionately impacting folks who are, you know, a member of the working class or working families.
Got another question from Michael Bryan, who wants to know how we can promote more affordable housing while limiting urban sprawl.
Yeah, I think a lot of this comes down to land use. It comes down to looking at the ways that we're zoning and promoting development, you know, allowing for certain levels of density. So a specific issue related to this are the recent conversations about accessory dwelling units and density. And I understand that this is a pretty contentious issue in many parts of Ward 6, where some neighborhoods really want to see this kind of flexibility. They want to be able to increase the density on their land, and other neighborhoods are really mad about it. And so it's definitely the kind of thing that I think is not a one-size-fits-all issue, but I think that part of it does come down to zoning and amending codes and things like that. Looking at overlay districts, I definitely believe in trying to limit urban sprawl. And I definitely do believe in greater density and promoting things like adaptive reuse of buildings and using what we've got in, you know, sort of that infill development model.
Go. Betsy Putnam and Olga to unmute and go ahead and ask your question live.
I feel like Tucson has not really decided that it's a city yet. I feel like real cities have things like restrooms for homeless people and others who are walking on the street to use in various locations, and real cities have amenities that they put in because there are crowds of people. And Tucson feels like just a huge sprawl where the left hand doesn't know what the right hand is doing. So I wonder how you can push for a little more coherence in such a desert sprawled city, because it feels like we don't really have a planning department.
Don't even get me started. Oh my gosh, Beth, don't even get me started. I've been like ranting for the last week about how planning and development has an annual budget of like a little over 8 million. It's like, are we investing enough in like the things that we want or not? And it almost feels like we have a little bit of an identity crisis going as a city, especially right now, of like, Tucson thinks it's a small town. I've heard a lot of people make that comment, but we're not small and we're just spreading out. And it feels like we need to make some decisions about how we're going to grow. And there's still time, I think, to kind of thoughtfully reevaluate. And you talk about sort of that chaotic piecemeal feeling of, I've got that feeling too sometimes of, you know, we need sort of a big picture strategic plan instead of this sort of, it almost feels chaotic, like, oh no, they're doing a thing over at Santa Rita. They might have like this piece of, you know, the park oh wait, now over there, they're going to put up a fence outside of the Children's Museum. It just feels like, what's happening? You have to keep an eagle eye on every agenda. And, you know, it's just hard to keep up. So I definitely share that sentiment. I think part of it has to do with bringing new perspective into city council, people who say, you know, gosh, we might need to invest more in our infrastructure, right? Invest more in planning and development. Maybe think about providing more cohesion between planning and development services and housing and community development. and get those folks talking to each other, because I see a lot of duplication of different ideas across different departments. So that's something that I think about naturally and that I've thought about in different roles on that sort of systems-wide level. So I appreciate that comment / question.
We have a question from environmentalist Jana Siegel, or she says, many parts of Tucson don't have enough trees. We need more rainwater harvesting to water trees in those neighborhoods, often because the landlords won't allow trees because they don't want to have to maintain them. Any ideas on how to solve that problem?
Totally. So I appreciate the question. I'm all about trees. It was so funny. I was actually climbing a tree yesterday morning at Reed Park with some arborists. So Complete Streets was passed 2 years ago, and it's this sort of idea about streetscaping, and it includes integrating tree canopy, green space, sort of totally in line with everything I'm talking about that has to do with this sort of multi-level, we're taking care of equity, we're taking care of climate change. It was passed 2 years ago, but it still hasn't been implemented. And so they're actually working on a prioritization right now, along with the Move Tucson Master Transportation Plan. That's like a citywide thing that I'm very interested in seeing how that develops. But I think that what it comes down to is the follow through I talked about earlier. So like, okay, we've committed to Complete Streets. Now we're talking about prioritizing, rolling this out. This vision is really exciting because it talks about walkability. It talks about safety, continuity of bicycle boulevards. It looks at the ways that pedestrian crossings are designed. We know pedestrian safety is something that we're all concerned about. We need to do more. And it integrates green space because we know that we really need that too. I was so excited about it. It's funny because my girlfriend was involved in like creating that. And so I remember texting her 2 years ago, like, they passed Complete Streets. And then she kind of said something a little bit like, well, you know, we'll see like how that ends up developing. And if that really, and I thought, well, that's a little cynical, but you know, it's 2021 and they're just prioritizing it now, so.
Shirley Mooney, you've got a question. Go ahead and ask it live.
Just a comment that I see a lot of attention in the city council being paid to infill development rather than sprawl. I think the issue of sprawl is more appropriate to the county than to the city. And I know that, for example, that there's a senior housing development being planned for Speedway and Country Club. Do you want to comment about that?
Well, I think that what you're touching on with the whole county versus city thing is something I've been interested in, which is, from what I understand from the folks I've been talking to, is that relationship hasn't historically been super close, but that maybe it's starting to repair. Like they just recently met for the first time. The city of Tucson and Pima County met for the first time in 3 decades. I think that it takes collaboration between city and county to address something like sprawl. Sprawl is feels like a really contentious issue because we do have people who feel strongly on both sides. We have folks who are living outside the city limits who really just don't want to have to deal with thinking about, you know, incorporating. And then we have other neighbors who really do want to see that. And so I think collaboration, I think it takes somebody with communication skills who's willing to get in the room and have hard conversations. And leadership is a balance between, I think, representation and also kind of like standing up for what's actually right, which is like, for example, climate change. That's reality, you know? So yeah, there's representing different viewpoints, and some viewpoints may say, oh, climate change is not a big deal, but we know that it is. Leadership says, yes, it is. Representation says, well, I'm still gonna listen to you and try to represent all of your views fairly.
That doesn't quite answer the question. My comment was about infill development, which is occurring in the city, and you are running for an office that would represent the city. Correct. And not the sprawl that we see in the county.
Right, but I see them as connected. I'm sorry, I kind of like jumped to the big picture on that one. I do believe in infill development, though. I believe in promoting greater density within the city.
Let's see, we have a question from Michael Bryan. Go ahead and unmute yourself.
All right. I just wanted to ask, you said that sustaining local economic development was an important goal for you. What exactly would you want the city to do to encourage and sustain local economic development? And is there anything that we're currently doing that we should stop doing in terms of economic development?
That's a really good question, Michael. And I think that there's a lot of different directions that could go in. I think that there are a lot of ways in which we could stop the type of economic development that is displacing folks and leaving people behind and not necessarily bringing in the types of jobs that we want. I think it has to do with incentivizing development and corporate tax abatements and an imbalanced dynamic in those conversations that prioritizes developers and business owners and doesn't truly give community stakeholders a seat at the table. That's one way that we could stop the type of economic development that we don't want to see. In terms of promoting more sustainable development, I think that there are initiatives that are already in the works now. I don't think it's a question of being someone who's going to come into city council with new ideas. I think it's more about seeing all of the things that are already in motion, updating Plan Tucson, looking at things like implementing complete streets, making sure that the transportation plan is sustainable. It's about following through and tracking. I'm not here to tell you all that I'm some kind of policy wizard that's going to invent something that's going to fix Tucson from the Ward 6 seat. But I am somebody who's always reading, always learning about what's already happening and thinking about what does it take to move those ideas forward in a way that feels good for all of us.
Okay, Robert Bulacek, please unmute yourself. He's got a question about fossil fuel vehicles.
To a comment about what should the city not be doing, and that's continuing to purchase fossil vehicles when they're more expensive lifetime costs and polluting and all that stuff. So yes,
absolutely.
That's an example of a simple thing the city needs to stop doing.
I totally agree, Robert. You know, there's so many different levels at which different things can happen. There's ways that you can make it so that certain developments don't even happen unless they have certain sustainability measures in place, right? Like there's different levels of ways the city could look at contracts with companies that they're outsourcing workers to. What do those contracts look like? What kinds of vehicles are being used for public transportation, right? So.
A related issue is natural gas in buildings. The state passed a law last year preventing the city from banning natural gas in new construction, but certainly there could be an incentive program to incentivize contractors to build all electric buildings. We've got to get the natural gas out of the city and everyone's buildings, actually, if we want to deal with climate.
So that's the thing. I mean, it really, for me, so much of my motivation for running for city council came down to seeing that things like that need to be prioritized wasn't being represented enough. I mean, I think that when you view things through those lenses, then you start making decisions that are in alignment with that. So yeah.
All right, we have a question from our former DGT president, Jeremy Lasher, who's at the meeting. Go ahead, Jeremy.
I had a question. You had mentioned rainwater harvesting and how difficult it is for renters. One issue that's been going on for years here in Arizona is that for homeowners who want to put in rainwater harvesting or put in green energy improvements to their houses, there's no availability of funding for people who can't take a home loan out. So if you're looking to put in a rainwater harvesting tower that costs $2,000 to $3,000, the city right now gives a refund on part of it, but you have to come up with the capital in the first place, which makes it very difficult, especially in Ward 6 in Midtown, for some of the poorer homeowners to be able to make improvements. When we first got an infrastructure bill through when President Obama was in place, some money was made available to the cities and with their discretion. Could you give us your thoughts and maybe look at researching the next infrastructure bill will most likely give some of that same monies and making sure that people can actually afford to make the improvements that we all agree have to be made without having to, mortgage their house to put in a $3,000 water tank?
Yeah, that's a great question, Jeremy. I think that there's been a lot of research to support the fact that, like, when you provide rebates, so deferred financial assistance, if you're low income, I mean, it's like you didn't get it at all, right? Like, what's the point? I can't put the money up front anyway. And so I think it's about that equity lens that I was talking about earlier of looking at allocating funds with the mindset of knowing, look, some folks just aren't going to have the cash up front, but we need to have different priorities besides just the bottom line, besides profit. We need to look at something that I've come across called triple bottom line accounting that takes multiple things into account, including impact on the climate. And I think that sometimes what we run up against is a reticence to invest in things and spend money, but some things are really important and we actually need to spend money on them. And this would be one area that I would say would be the case for that.
Thanks.
Dr. Barbara Warren has a question. Please unmute yourself, Barbara.
Hi. I want to ask a question that was touched on by others, but I'd like to hear what your holistic view is of transportation in our city. When we're talking about complete streets, we're often just talking about making bicycle paths, and that's younger people. In my community, there are people who are wheelchair bound or cannot walk to the grocery store a block away because the sidewalks are incomplete. There's gravel along the road. Instead, we have to walk through. What kinds of vehicles would you like to see for the city? How can you address people of all different paths in life, walks in life, to be able to equitably be able to have a very sustainable transportation system? What will that system look like?
I appreciate that question, Barbara. And I definitely think that when you're designing anything that has to do with moving people, that you really need to center accessibility in that conversation. I think that it has to do with incentivizing people toward more public transportation. When I was reading the report that was the basis for Complete Streets, they were looking at some of the major arteries in our city and how much capacity they have and how many vehicles move through, and looking at mass public transit, and basically calculating that there's enough room on these roads to implement, like, use whole lanes for that stuff. It's about moving away from an auto-centric model. It's definitely about having sidewalks. In the recent budget town hall that the city of Tucson put on, I was really struck by sort of seeing, like, the ways that there's so much potential to develop better systems by engaging the community. There was one participant who spoke up about sidewalks and said, you know, those little bumpy yellow parts are really not good for what I need to use to get around. That kind of, you could have all the expertise in the world, but if you don't hear from a citizen that that's a problem, you may never know as somebody who's designing these transportation systems. So if you center accessibility and you say, okay, you know, if I'm somebody who has any type of mobility issue, can I still get from point A to point B? And yeah, you're right. It's not just about bicycles, for sure.
And a lot of us drive electric vehicles, but there are not a lot of places to charge them, so it's hard to go very far. So how can you help that situation?
Yeah. I mean, electric vehicles is another area that has a lot of potential for growth, but needs the infrastructure. That's something that I certainly care about looking into more and figuring out ways to make it more accessible.
All right. Tony Zinman, member of our board, has a question. Tony, go right ahead.
I'd like to know if you have any thoughts about reducing gun violence here in Tucson.
Well, I mean, I think it takes collaboration, and I think it takes working with the other members of the council. You know, I wouldn't be existing, you know, in my own office, but it would be about building consensus around the idea that this is truly a priority. I'm not somebody who's looking to go in and be the one who changes everything. I'm here to work with the folks who are already there doing the work and hopefully build momentum toward things like reducing gun violence. It's really important.
But you don't have anything specific that you thought about to help to accomplish this?
Well, I mean, I think it ties into sort of my ideas about public safety and sort of approaching public safety in terms of looking at greater investment in different areas of our community. In terms of like specific measures about specifically reducing gun violence, That's not something that I currently have worked out in my platform, if I'm being completely transparent, but it is something that I would prioritize in whatever capacity I could.
Well, I appreciate, and we're involved in a local group called Moms United Action for Guns since we will start having meetings again. Appreciate you coming to see us.
I'd be super keen on that. You know, it's so hard to like be in some of these events. Sometimes I just feel like the questions are, you know, and I want to show you all that I really care about this and I want to give good answers, but it's a little nerve-wracking too. I don't want to pretend like I know what I'm talking about if I haven't thought about it before.
No, I appreciate your honesty.
We have a question from Kat Ripley. Please unmute yourself and go right ahead.
Hi, thank you so much, Democrats of Greater Tucson, Larry, and all the members. And thank you, Miranda, for sharing with us your view and your strategies and your goals. And thank you mostly for running for office. It's a challenge, and you're brave for doing it. So I want to try to get to the 30,000-foot view. Your detailed answers are really important, and we really appreciate your candor and your transparency. So thank you for that. You're clearly qualified and smart and passionate, and you know these issues. I know you do. So can you just share with us how your experience as an academic advisor and also someone who helped to found the campus union is going to make you a better city council member?
In fact, I would point to my experience helping to form the union at the U of A as one of the drivers for wanting to run for public office, if I'm being totally honest. Because what we felt, I think, within the U of A community was the effect of top-down decision-making that didn't meaningfully include the people that the decisions affected. And there are so many different ways that you can react to that. And it's completely valid to get depressed and feel angry and upset when these things happen, when you suddenly get told that your pay is getting cut, that you're getting furloughed, that your colleagues are all getting laid off. Or you could start talking to each other, sharing information and figuring out what can we do, you know, and it was kind of amazing to realize like, oh, hey, that can actually do something. We managed to end the furloughs early. We lowered, we raised the pay floor. So at first, like everybody was getting pay cuts, but then, folks who made about, below 46,000 a year didn't. And so rallying a diverse group of folks with very different opinions around these broad goals, to me, that was really powerful. It's really important to be able to work with people that you don't agree with on every single point. And so I think, and especially getting into a leadership position with does leadership mean? And wanting to model a new way of getting things done that wasn't, hey, I'm the expert at the front who's making all the decisions and you all should listen to me because I'm the leader, but more of a participatory horizontal style of leadership that empowers the people around you to speak up as well, because we all have things to say. Academic advising to me, really comes down to, it's so analogous to the constituent services that a city council office provides, where you have all kinds of random questions coming in and different needs. And, sometimes folks are reaching out to you and they're already upset because something hasn't gone right. And you're the person who's there to help them out by empowering them to find ways to help themselves, by connecting them to resources. You're there to meet them where they're at, to treat people with respect, even if they're not being nice to you, and to break down complex ideas for people who have varying levels of awareness. And so, to talk about policy making, for example, working in higher ed for the last 15 years has often involved playing the role of being a liaison between administration and the student. And so administration makes a policy. A lot of times it doesn't include the people who work with the students, but then it does obviously fall upon you to talk to the student and explain, hey, they made this policy. This is the effect that it's going to have on you. And also here's how I'm going to help you navigate through that policy change. And also advocating the other way, right? Hey, I'm hearing a bunch of things from students. You all should really pay attention because this pattern is indicating there's a systemic problem that needs to be addressed in a more meaningful way. So I feel very like ready to jump into something like constituent services and really digging in and learning how to better connect with people in my conversations with folks around Ward 6 and canvassing. Some people are very cynical, and they straight up say things like, it's never going to change. They don't listen to us. It's just, they're going to build another luxury high-rise apartment building and that's going to be it. But I don't want to give up, you know, like people care. I think that we can get it back. You know, I see like a resurgence in civic engagement.
Thank you. We have a question from Carolyn Klassen, a fellow writer on the blog for Arizona. Go ahead, Carolyn.
Hi, Miranda. I've blogged twice about the Reed Park Zoo proposal. I guess I'm just asking you, would you have handled that issue any differently as a council person?
I absolutely would have handled it differently. There are many different points along the way when things could have been handled differently. We could go back in time and pick apart the open meeting process, the ways in which neighborhoods were reached out to. We could pick apart whether the master plan was approved or not. We could look at the schedules and the groups who were invited. But even just looking at today, even just looking at 2 weeks ago, there's still different ways to handle it. You don't just keep telling people they're wrong.
Yeah.
I mean, I kind of couldn't believe it because it just felt very dismissive and condescending, because what I see around this organizing over the issue of Reed Park are a group of really thoughtful, well-informed, engaged citizens. And so that part was pretty heartbreaking to sort of see like, well, they should have read more or they should have been better informed, you know. And there's also like privilege embedded in that, right? Of like, okay, you also have to have the time to tune into the meetings. So yeah, 100% I would have handled it differently. Public space, right? We can talk about public input. We can also talk about public space and the ways in which it keeps getting taken away and put behind paywalls, right? Like we need to implement like systemic safeguards and protections so that we don't keep having to wage these battles in a piecemeal fashion about taking space away from us. Like, hey, we need more, honestly.
We have Labor Leader Paul Stapleton Smith on the call with us. Paul.
Our directive from State Chairwoman Raquel Teran and Jamie Harrison from the DNC is that we're an organizing party. We organize everywhere, all the time, bringing everybody to the table who heretofore hasn't been able to. That being said, here for the city of Tucson, there's a brilliant group of C3s and C4s and labor union folks who are running a $15 minimum wage initiative for our city elections. Would you please tell me your position on that and what your thoughts are on its impact?
Oh yeah, thanks for the question, Paul. It's good to see you. It's been a true joy to become more connected and familiar with all of these different organizations locally who are doing amazing work. I absolutely support a $15 minimum wage. I think it's incredibly important to focus on the ways in which we can pay workers a fair wage. It just feels like the way that we're trying to grow as a city and leaving people behind. In the long term, it doesn't, how are you supposed to develop the economy if nobody has any money? You know, it's $15, frankly, I mean, that only works out to $31K a year. So it's still not enough, but it's a start. It's a start. You know, we need to figure out ways to lift people up and quit like sort of valuing the bottom line at the expense of everything else.
Well, we have time for one last question, and that is from our board member, Michael Bryan. He wants to know, do you have any specific criticisms of how Steve Kozachik has done his job?
Everybody always wants to go in this direction. It's so interesting. It's antithetical to my nature to go personal and to be negative about folks. But of course, I have to acknowledge that when you're challenging an incumbent, it's inherently a referendum on, you know, sort of saying, hey, something different needs to happen. What I will say is that I feel that we do need to make some decisions about how we're moving into the future as a city, and that the path that we're on right now, I think it needs to change. I think that we need to change course and focus more on worker protections, on housing justice, on reining in development and making it more community and neighborhood centric. And also racial justice. I think that was another huge driver for me to run for office, was wanting to see more leadership on city council who understands that we have a role, each of us have a role and a basic responsibility to dismantle white supremacy and systems of oppression.
Okay, Miranda, why don't you wrap up the program for us today? Tell us how people can get in touch with you, and if people want to support your campaign, where should our members of Democrats of Greater Tucson go to?
I am running as a clean elections candidate because, well, that's what makes it possible for me to run as somebody who's not independently wealthy or connected to special interests or corporations. We need to collect at least 200 donations of $10 or more, and that kicks in the public matching program for funds. So the donate link would take you to that. You have to be within Tucson city limits to be able to count toward the 200 total, but of course, any donations are appreciated. This is a people-powered campaign for sure. We could also always use volunteers. We have a growing group of volunteers. I've been out canvassing myself. You can also go to our website for more information and bullet points about my platform and ideas. Our signature deadline is April 5th. So if you go to our website, there's a link right to the online signature petition. So yeah, we're going to be turning those in on April 1st, on the morning of April 1st. And I hope that, if I didn't answer anybody's questions or concerns thoroughly enough in this, I really hope that you'll reach out so that we can connect offline. I think sometimes these formats give me a little bit of stage fright and I lose my words. And so I just hope we can continue talking.
Well, thanks so much for presenting with us today at Democrats of Greater Tucson. We want to wish you a lot of luck on your campaign. And thank everybody for coming today. Stay tuned. We're going to have another fabulous meeting and another great speaker in a week. Best wishes to everybody. Thank you for coming.